Miranda Scott clocked the black woman in 3A the moment she stepped into first class. Among the sea of Brooks Brothers suits and Tiffany jewelry that typically filled the premium cabin on this JFK to SFO route, she stood out like a weed in a cultivated garden. Her natural curls were pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her outfit modest but well-tailored. No designer labels Miranda could spot. No Rolex, no Prada bag, none of the status symbols that seasoned flight attendants learned to recognize as visual passports to the front of the plane. Miranda had been working premium cabins for 15 years. She knew who belonged and who didn't. "Boarding pass, please," Miranda demanded, not bothering with her usual customer service smile. The other first-class passengers were watching from behind their Wall Street journals and iPads, their attention caught by her tone. Ava Carter looked up from her book, momentarily surprised by the abrupt request. "Of course," she replied, reaching into her carry-on. Miranda snatched the document from Ava's outstretched hand, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. "There seems to be some mistake," Ava asked, her voice level. "The boarding pass shows 3A. That's this seat." Miranda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, but these premium seats are very expensive. I think there's been a mix-up in the system." The implication hung in the air, unmistakable in its meaning. A middle-aged white man across the aisle lowered his newspaper slightly, watching the interaction with undisguised interest. "There's no mix-up," Ava stated calmly. "I purchased this ticket like everyone else." Miranda's nostrils flared slightly. "Look, honey, let's not create a scene. First class on this route typically hosts our more established clientele. Perhaps economy would be more your style? I'm sure you'd be more comfortable with your own kind back there." The cabin went silent. The blatant racism in Miranda's statement had crossed the line from coded language to explicit bias. "My own kind?" Ava repeated, her voice still remarkably composed despite the public humiliation. "And what kind would that be, exactly?" "You know exactly what I mean," Miranda hissed, dropping all pretense of professionalism. "These seats cost more than your whole ghetto wardrobe. Did you think you could just upgrade yourself and no one would notice? This ain't the back of the bus, sweetheart." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A younger flight attendant named Clara, who had been distributing pre-flight champagne, paused mid-pour, her expression horrified. "Miranda," she whispered urgently. "What are you doing?" Miranda ignored her colleague. "I'm going to need you to move to the main cabin," she told Ava, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority white women often deploy when speaking to people of color. The Karen voice, as it had come to be known on social media. Now, Ava studied Miranda's face for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail. Then, without another word, she gathered her belongings and stood. "Clara," Ava said quietly to the younger flight attendant, "could you please show me to an available seat in the main cabin?" Clara, visibly distressed by her colleague's behavior, nodded quickly. "Of course. I'm so sorry about this. I'll find you a comfortable spot." As Ava followed Clara toward economy, Miranda's triumphant smirk was visible to everyone in first class. She turned to the middle-aged white man who had been watching the scene unfold. "More champagne, sir?" she offered, her customer service voice magically restored. He declined with a curt shake of his head, his expression unreadable behind his newspaper. In the narrow walkway between cabins, Clara apologized profusely. "I don't know what got into Miranda. That was completely unacceptable." "It's not your fault," Ava assured her. "What's your full name, Clara?" "Jimenez," she replied, somewhat confused by the question. "I've only been flying this route for 3 months." Ava nodded, committing the name to memory. "Thank you, Clara Jimenez. I appreciate your kindness." As Clara settled her into an aisle seat in premium economy, the closest available spot to first class, Ava removed her phone and sent a brief text. No emotion crossed her face as her fingers moved swiftly across the screen, but something in her deliberate calm suggested this wasn't her first experience with such treatment. The flight proceeded without further incident for exactly 47 minutes. Miranda busied herself with first-class service, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Clara whenever they passed each other in the galley. Clara, for her part, made a point of checking on Ava periodically, bringing her the same premium snacks and beverages offered in first class. As the meal service concluded, the aircraft's internal phone system chimed in the galley. Clara answered, her expression shifting from confusion to shock as she listened to the caller. "Yes, sir. Way, sir," she said, before hanging up and turning to Miranda with wide eyes. "That was the captain. He needs to speak with you immediately." Miranda rolled her eyes. "Probably another passenger with ridiculous dietary restrictions. I'll call him back after I finish the coffee service." "No," Clara insisted, her voice unusually firm. "He said immediately, and he specifically said it's about a passenger discrimination complaint that's been forwarded directly to airline headquarters." The color drained from Miranda's face. "What are you talking about? What complaint?" Before Clara could respond, the cabin intercom crackled to life. "This is Captain Reynolds speaking. Would Flight Attendant Miranda Scott please report to the flight deck immediately?" The announcement, heard throughout the aircraft, caused passengers to look up from their screens and meals. Miranda's hands trembled slightly as she straightened her uniform and made her way to the cockpit, conscious of the eyes following her progress. Inside the flight deck, Captain Reynolds held out a satellite phone. "There's someone from executive offices who needs to speak with you. This is highly irregular, Scott. I've never had a mid-flight call from the COO in 20 years of flying." Miranda took the phone with a growing sense of dread. "This is Flight Attendant Scott," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Ms. Scott, this is Robert Chen, Chief Operating Officer of Atlas Airways," came the clipped response. "I'm calling because we've received an extremely disturbing complaint about an incident that occurred during boarding on your flight. A first-class passenger was allegedly removed from her rightful seat and subjected to explicitly racist language from you. Is this accurate?" Miranda's instinct for self-preservation kicked in. "Sir, there was a minor seating confusion, but I followed standard protocol for—" Did you not?" Chen interrupted. "Tell a ticketed first-class passenger that this ain't the back of the bus and suggest she would be more comfortable with her own kind in economy." The direct quote of her own words hit Miranda like a physical blow. "I may have used poor phrasing, but there was legitimate confusion about—" "There was no confusion, Ms. Hugh Scott," Chen stated flatly. "The passenger in question is Dr. Ava Carter, Director of Neurosurgery at Stanford Medical Center and a Platinum Elite member who flies with us weekly. She has been a loyal Atlas customer for over a decade and has never once been questioned about her seating assignment until today." Miranda gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. "Sir, I had no idea who she was. If I'd known—" "That's precisely the problem," Chen cut her off again. "Your behavior shouldn't change based on a passenger's status or title, and the fact that it would suggest this isn't about confusion at all, but about prejudice." Captain Reynolds was watching Miranda's face, his own expression hardening as he pieced together what had occurred. "What's more concerning," Chen continued, "is that Dr. Carter wasn't the only one to report this incident. We've received communications from 3 other passengers in first class who witnessed your behavior and were appalled. One of them is a major shareholder in our parent company." The full implications of her actions began to crash down on Miranda. 15 years of building seniority, securing the most desirable routes, cultivating relationships with frequent flyers, all potentially destroyed in a single moment of unchecked bias. "Upon landing in San Francisco," Chen informed her, "you are to report directly to HR Representative Melissa Wong, who will be waiting at the gate. You are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. Captain Reynolds will inform you of the crew member who will take over your duties for the remainder of the flight." The line went dead before Miranda could respond. Captain Reynolds reclaimed the phone, his expression making it clear he'd heard enough to form his own conclusions. "Is it true?" he asked simply. Miranda opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain how the passenger hadn't looked like she belonged in first class, how she was just doing her job by verifying credentials. But the words died in her throat as she recognized how damning they would sound spoken aloud. "I made a mistake," she finally admitted. "A mistake," Reynolds repeated flatly. "That's one way to put it. Return to the cabin and inform Clara that she'll be handling first class for the remainder of the flight. You are to remain in the rear galley and perform only essential safety duties. No passenger interaction." As Miranda made her way back through the aircraft, she felt the weight of stares following her progress. Word had clearly spread. The whispered conversations, the pointed glances, the smartphones discreetly capturing her walk of shame. By the time they landed in San Francisco, she would be a viral sensation, her face plastered across social media as the latest embodiment of entitled racism. Near the middle of the aircraft, she passed row 14 where Ava Carter sat calmly reading a medical journal, her expression betraying nothing of the professional execution she had just orchestrated. Their eyes met briefly. Miranda's filled with dawning horror, Ava's simply observant, noting Miranda's reaction like a scientist documenting expected results in an experiment. In that moment, Miranda realized she had severely underestimated the woman she had dismissed as an interloper. While Miranda had been smugly asserting her authority over the cabin, Ava had been quietly setting in motion the machinery that would dismantle Miranda's entire career. The next 5 hours were the longest of Miranda's life. Confined to the rear galley, she watched as Clara efficiently managed the first-class service she had been performing for years. Passengers who would normally chat familiarly with Miranda now avoided eye contact when passing to the lavatory, some making a point of smiling warmly at Ava in economy as they passed. By the time the aircraft began its descent into San Francisco, Miranda had run through every possible scenario for what awaited her. Best case, a formal reprimand and sensitivity training. Worst case, termination and public disgrace. The aviation industry was small. Word would spread quickly that she was damaged goods, unhirable in an era where companies were hypersensitive about their diversity and inclusion reputations. As promised, Melissa Wong from HR was waiting at the gate as passengers deplaned. A petite Asian woman with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, she pulled Miranda aside before she could even collect her luggage from the crew compartment. "We'll be conducting the formal discussion in a private room," Wong informed her briskly. "But before we do, there's someone who wants to speak with you." Miranda turned to find Ava Carter standing nearby, her carry-on neatly packed, her expression composed, but not vindictive. "Ms. Scott," Ava began, her voice measured, "I want you to understand something. This isn't personal revenge. This is about accountability." Miranda found herself unable to meet Ava's steady gaze. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I made assumptions that were racist," Ava supplied when Miranda faltered. "Let's be absolutely clear about that. You made racist assumptions and then acted on them with the full confidence that there would be no consequences for doing so." Miranda flinched at the direct labeling but couldn't deny its accuracy. "I fly this route every week," Ava continued. "Sometimes in first class, sometimes in economy, depending on availability and whether I'm paying personally or the hospital is covering it. Today was the first time I've been challenged about my right to sit in a seat I purchased. That's not coincidence, Ms. Scott. That's bias." Miranda nodded mutely, her earlier indignation now replaced by a dawning recognition of her own prejudice. "I'm not here to witness your punishment or demand your firing," Ava stated. "I'm here because I want you to understand the impact of your actions. When you decided I didn't belong based solely on my appearance, you weren't just being rude to one passenger. You were reinforcing the message that Black professionals receive constantly. No matter our achievements, we remain perpetual outsiders in certain spaces." Melissa Wong stood awkwardly to the side, clearly uncomfortable with this unscheduled confrontation but unwilling to interrupt. "What happens next with your employment isn't up to me," Ava concluded. "But I hope, whatever the outcome, that this becomes a moment of genuine reflection rather than defensive justification." Good luck, Ms. Scott. With that, Ava turned and walked away, leaving Miranda standing with the HR representative, watching as the woman she had so casually humiliated displayed more grace than Miranda had shown in 15 years of customer service. The formal meeting was mercifully brief. Atlas Airways had a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. Miranda's actions had violated not only company policy, but potentially federal aviation regulations regarding equal treatment of passengers. Given the multiple witness accounts and Miranda's own admission to Captain Reynolds, termination was the only appropriate response. "You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay," Wong explained, sliding the paperwork across the table. "Your benefits will end at midnight tonight. You'll need to surrender your company ID and credentials before leaving the airport." Miranda signed where indicated, her hand moving mechanically as the reality of her situation sank in. 15 years of service ended with a signature and the surrender of a plastic ID card. She couldn't even summon righteous anger, just a hollow recognition that she had done this to herself. As she exited the administrative offices, Miranda noticed a small commotion near the customer service desk. Robert Chen, the COO who had called the plane, was personally speaking with Ava Carter. Beside them stood Clara Jimenez, looking simultaneously nervous and excited, as Chen shook her hand enthusiastically. Though Miranda couldn't hear their conversation, the body language told the story. Clara was being commended for her professional handling of a difficult situation, perhaps even being offered a promotion. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, one career ending as another ascended, the cosmic scales of justice balancing themselves in real time. 3 days later, as Miranda scrolled through job listings for positions she was increasingly certain she wouldn't get, Atlas Airways issued a public statement. Without naming Miranda specifically, they announced the termination of an employee for discriminatory behavior, along with a comprehensive overhaul of their diversity training program and the creation of a new executive position focused on passenger inclusion and equity. The final paragraph mentioned the formation of an advisory council comprised of frequent flyers from diverse backgrounds who would provide ongoing feedback on the company's practices and policies. The council would be chaired by Dr. Ava Carter, whose unfortunate experience has catalyzed meaningful change within our organization. Miranda closed the browser window, unable to continue reading. She had become a footnote in someone else's story of triumph over prejudice, the villain whose actions had inadvertently sparked institutional reform.